Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Friday. And on today's show, we're going to be going over how we're moving from legislative session to election season. Or, as those of us who are involved in the grassroots politics side of things would say, we're switching from the time where they get to hurt us by making laws and getting overly involved in our lives to now where we get to hurt them, we get to make them pay. And it's already turning ugly this primary season as the war between the conservatives and the blue dog Republicans, as I call them, heats up. And the blue dog side is getting some financial help from the teachers unions, which are dropping some big bucks trying to stop the ground that's being gained from the school choice and in the liberal indoctrination in our school advocates in the state. You know, the people who are tired of our schools being endless money pits and doing nothing but teaching our kids how to be good liberals. You know, those kinds of things. Can't teach them how to read or do math. You know, those people like you and me. Well, they're upset that we're gaining so much ground. So they're going to start warring in and helping the blue dog Republicans start to possibly pull up some victories in this primary. We'll see what they can pull out. And you can tell that it's going to get extra spicy this season as we already have a Southern Poverty Law Center calling out one of the conservative candidates in one of the hotly contested primaries as anti-Semitic. And then, of course, following that, some questionable journalisming going on, whatever, if that's a word, journalisming, going on from the Herald leader in response. But first, before we get started, I do want to remind you, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. Check out old shows. You can see where to listen. You got a contact tab there. We got question, comments, concerns for the show. You have something you want to say, just click contact and you can fill that out, or you can also email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. So first, before I dig into those stories, I wanted to take a second to remind you why paying attention during this primary season is so incredibly important. I want to rewind with us. Let's get into our time machines, our Wayback Machines, and go back to the legislative session of 2016, an important session as it would turn out. Now, this was just 8 years ago, but would be the last time Democrats would have control of the House in Kentucky, and it'd be the last time they'd have the chance to have a real influence on the budget. After all, the appropriation bills always start in the House, and though we had control of the Senate as Republicans at this time, we still had to work with the Democrats in the House to craft these spending bills. But Donald Trump was on the ballot in 2016, and that would lead to the first time in Kentucky history, Republicans grabbing control of our state House. And you know, at this time, back in 2016, you know, before Republicans grabbed the House, when there was no danger of passing conservative bills, you had people like Representative Michael Meredith and Representative Stephen Rudy, who would sponsor legislation like House Bill 14, which back in 2016, House Bill 14 would have exempted persons, officials, and institutions with religious objections to same-sex marriage from any requirement to solemnize such marriages, basically to recognize those marriages. That's an idea that these same people would scoff at now. As evidence, just look at the religious freedom bills that died in session this year. And both Rudy and Meredith voted no in 2023 on allowing a vote to ban minors from attending drag shows to come forward to the floor. I want you to remember that when these people like Meredith and Rudy were claiming they were great conservatives and the real Republicans, when they make those claims now, I want you to remember who they were. Because those of us who ask for them to pass things like, hey, don't have minors at drag shows, we are called radical by them. We're called not the real Republicans. We're called not actually conservative. But when you rewind to 2016, they were more, quote unquote, conservative radical just 8 years ago than we are asking for them to do now. My, how the times They do and change. But I wanted to go back to 2016 because it was the last year that Democrats got to make appropriations bill and a budget in the House. And Democrats, remember, they're liberals, right? They're the big spenders. They're the big government spending people. And Republicans, as we're all told, are supposed to be small government people. And small government people would mean less spending, right? So if we took over the budget from the Democrats, wouldn't we have spent less right away? Wouldn't we have spent less over time? Because, of course, we would be running on... I don't remember anybody at the time running on a platform of, hey, the Democrats actually aren't spending enough money. They're not doing enough. Government's not big enough. We need to spend and do more. I don't remember them ever running on that platform. Instead, they all ran on a platform of they're spending too much, conservatism, tax less, spend less, the government's too big. That's what they ran on. But what do we get? Well, in 2016, the appropriations budget would end up being passed was a total of $36.6 billion. Now, though it was only 8 years ago, we got to remember that Joe Biden is our president. So obviously, inflation has ensued. So we have to adjust for 8 years of inflation if we want to see where Republicans should have been. And that would be the equivalent, adjusted for inflation, $36.6 billion in budgeting, would be the equivalent of $47.9 billion in today's money. So if Republicans just kept spending the same amount as Democrats, simply keeping up with inflation, didn't even make cuts, just spent the same amount, they would today be spending $47.9 billion. So you'd expect with a bunch of conservatives now in control of the budget, talking about how they're very conservative, we would start to see some smaller and smaller spending packages. I mean, even take this most recent budget that passed, and you'll hear legislators now talking up how it's the most conservative budget they've ever passed. It's an extremely conservative budget. They're out there peddling it out there now, talking up all the different parts, claiming it's a great victory, a great conservative victory. So when Democrats are in control, adjusted for inflation, they're spending $47.9. So how much do you think the most recent budget that our legislators passed here in Kentucky, these Republicans passed, how much do you think it was? Do you think it's less than $47.9 billion? Or maybe it's the same? Or maybe you think, it's probably around $50 billion. Well, you'd be wrong. You'd be dead wrong. Because next year's budget, the one that 8 years later, only Republicans, because we have a supermajority in both the House and Senate, only Republicans had control over. It's not $50 billion. It's not $60 billion. It's not $70 billion. They are spending $75.4 billion. 75.4. That is 57.4% more in spending than the Democrats adjusted for inflation. 57.4% more than when the Democrats were in power in the House, when Democrats had control of the budget. Yet they want to tell us this is the most conservative budget of all time. They want to tell us that they're doing the important conservative work. Are you buying that? Well, when we come back, we're going to be digging a little bit more into that change over that 8 years to point out exactly why we need to be paying attention to what is going on in these primaries that are coming up. We'll have that right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Before the break, we were going over how 8 years ago in 2016, Democrats, when they had control of the House here in Kentucky, and they had the ability to help make the budget. Obviously Republicans had control in the Senate, and Republicans had control of the governor's mansion too as well. So when it was Republicans who had the opportunity to help, or Democrats had the opportunity to weigh in on the budget, adjusted for inflation, in today's dollars, we were spending $47.9 billion. Now it's only so-called conservative Republicans, so-called Republicans, who are able to make the budget. We have an 80% of Senate seats and House seats right here in Kentucky. And so with them in control of the budget, $47.9 billion would be them spending the same as Democrats, but instead this next year's budget is $75.4 billion, 57.4% more than when Democrats were in power. And of course, they call this the most fiscally conservative budget of all time. What happened to the Republicans of 2016? I'd rather have those Republicans now. We had bills to protect religious freedoms against being forced to conform or partake in gay marriages. And now we have a bill to protect religious freedoms. And what we hear from the same people who sponsored that piece of legislation is, well, we don't want it to interact or interfere with the fairness ordinances that says you can't discriminate against people based upon their sexuality. They say, no, we can't do that. But, the cake shop person, according to the fairness ordinances, those cake shop makers, they have to make a cake for that gay couple's wedding. They can't reject them. Those same people that are worried about defending the fairness ordinances were sponsoring bills that would allow even government employees to say, look, religiously speaking, I disagree with same-sex marriages, and so I'm going to have to pass on that. Where are those that would be spending almost $30 billion less? $30 billion. I want them back. But see, those people, even some of the same, they become unmoored, untethered from their principles, from what makes them conservative. You see, it's really easy to be principled when there are no temptations coming at you. When you have not the power to pass things, it's easy to proclaim all kinds of things. But the minute you get the power, and you get the power because, and this is what's crazy, they got the power, Republicans got the power because the Democrats were not delivering for the people of Kentucky. They no longer trusted their leadership. Part of it to do with the federal level, part of it to do with the local level, but they no longer trusted their leadership. And they liked what the Republicans were telling them. They liked the principles they were being, quote unquote, sold. But instead of staying true to those principles, they become unmoored. They become untethered the minute temptation comes their way and the ocean gets a bit rocky. Because when it came knocking, they found out that their principledness was lacking. And in case you don't think this is important, and you don't know why spending $30 billion more is such a big deal, there is about 4.5-ish million Kentuckians. $30 billion is $6,818 a person for a family of four. For a family of four, that'd be $27,000 a year. $27,000 a year more in your pockets. Because it's being sucked out of the system somewhere. They're not printing it. The state doesn't print dollars, so it has to be sucked out somewhere. And you may say, Andrew, well, that's just federal funds coming through. Federal funding over those 8 years. In 2016, it was $12 billion. This year, it's $20 billion. So even if we lowered that to $22, $21 billion or so in state spending more, that's still $5,000 a person. $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in Kentucky, that we would have more in our households. They're being sucked out of your household through one way or another. They're either taxing private businesses, and so they're increasing their prices, and it's hitting you in the pocketbook. They're either creating licenses and fees and inflating those costs, which means that end user products end up going up in price and you're paying for it there. They either have increased the places where they're charging sales tax, and so therefore that has increased and you felt it one way or another. You don't realize it, but $5,000 a person is how much more, adjusted for inflation, mind you. That's how much more you would have in your family if our state government returned to the Democrat spending levels of 2016. 2016. I mean, I don't remember, as I said before, I don't remember Republicans ever running on a platform of let's spend more and make a larger government. But that's what we've got. And are you upset yet? I'm upset. When I set out to do this show, I said, it'd be an interesting thing. Let's go back and look at the budget from 2016. Let's just see percentages. I got to adjust for inflation and all these other things. But let's just try to compare apples to apples here and see what it actually looks like. Because I thought it would be more. Because I know we've spent more. And I said, I knew government has grown. I knew the Republicans have been spending more money. I didn't know it would be this much. I didn't realize it was 57%. 57%. I mean, and this is the thing here, okay? This is why we have to pay attention during these primary seasons, because these so-called Republicans are a joke. They are just the new and improved Democrats of yesteryear, and I'd like to say they're just more conservatively social Democrats of yesteryear, so they're more socially conservative on the social issues the Democrats were of, let's say the early 2000s, but I don't think that's accurate. I think they're either exactly where the Democrats were in the early 2000s or even slightly socially more liberal. And you know what the scary part of that is? Is that 20 years ago, the Democrat Party of the early 2000s laid the foundation and ended up becoming what is the Democrat Party of today 20 years later. And look at the Democrat Party of today. Sex change operations for minors? Exposing children in public school libraries to pornography, essentially. And then when you call them out for it, they say that you're banning books because you don't want tax dollars spent exposing children to pornography. Fighting on the side. We have Democrats in our state legislature right now, that actually tried to defend the idea that possibly some way child sex dolls could be used for pedophiles and called pedophiles minors attracted people. We have that right now. And so if we look at our past and we say the Republicans of today look more like the Democrats of the early 2000s, that's scary for me. Because that means that the conservative party, the so-called conservative party, in 20 years, will it look like now the Democrats of today? I don't know if we'll make it that long, because I think by that time our country will most likely become bankrupt or run like a third world banana republic unless we do something. And that's why it's incredibly important for us to be paying attention in the election season. That's why it's important to get off your butt and support candidates. Support them with funds, time, spread the word. It's important to get involved because right now, we don't have a conservative party in control. We basically don't have a conservative party at all. We have a party that says they are conservative, but needs to be dragged along, kicking and screaming to do conservative things. So don't buy their conservative rhetoric with no actions. Don't buy their talking up big spending plans. And please, for the love of everything, don't clap for them like the mindless seals performing for a piece of chum. Sitting there, oh, so wonderful. Oh, such a conservative budget. Don't do that. Don't buy that. They're spending 57% more than the Democrats. 57% more. $5,000 more per person. Not coming from the federal government. And you're going to clap for them. Challenge them instead. Ask them why they voted for so much spending, if they did. And if possible, if you have a better replacement, get rid of them. Send a clear message. Stay true to your principles or be gone. Or be gone. Speaking of primary season, turning now to campaign talk. We have an article from WKU's NPR that was wrote by Joe Sonka. I'm going to go through that We are coming up on a break, though, but I'm going to dig down into that, kind of analyze some different parts of it to really show what's going on with our politics here in Kentucky. We'll have all that and more when we get back right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you here in a few short minutes. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll see you back here in a short bit. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Turning now to campaign talk. We have this article from WKU-NPR that was wrote by Joe Sonka. So I'm going to read through it, but honestly, I cut out a lot of what's not important to my commentary on this article. So it will, maybe to you listening, it'll sound like the full article, but I actually cut out some paragraphs here and there for, shortness, for time. So feel free, check out the article yourself if you want to read all of it. Because like I said, I'm taking chunks of it out. I don't want to misrepresent, make you think this is the entire article, even though it kind of will flow like it is. But anyways, let's dig into it. So starting off here, one of the largest financial contributors for political advertisements in the upcoming Republican primaries for the Kentucky House comes from what many would consider an unlikely source, the PAC of the Jefferson County Teachers Unions. Better Schools Kentucky, the political arm of the Jefferson County Teachers Association, has contributed at least $300,000 towards PAC advertisements in 7 competitive GOP primary races in the past 2 months. The teachers unions typically support Democrats and oppose Republicans in the state due to their policy stances, as Democrats support larger salaries for teachers and oppose efforts to direct public funding to private or charter schools. Likewise, Republican officials in Frankfort have long used Jefferson County Public Schools and their teachers unions as a punching bag in both rhetoric and policy, long considering plans for a state takeover or breaking up of the district, along with audits and laws to restrict union dues. However, Republicans currently hold 80% of the seats in each chamber of the Kentucky General Assembly, and the GOP caucuses have a firm grip on whatever legislation makes its way into law. Cassie Lyles, a teacher at Fairdale High School and the president of Better Schools Kentucky, says it's unlikely Democrats will come close to taking back that majority anytime soon, so we've got to find a way to build relationships in our current reality. All the Republicans supported in these primaries are ones that we think will be or have been supportive of public schools in the past, Lyles said. So I know I just kind of covered a lot, so let's take a second and dissect that. Because what they're stating is that, we've always supported Democrats. Like that's an accepted fact. They mainly support Democrats. They basically have always only supported Democrats because Democrats were the ones who aligned with their beliefs. But now they're saying, well, maybe, perhaps, possibly, we could buy a few Republicans in office and get a few more Republicans in office to go against what their core principles and beliefs are of the Republican Party. Now, how do we know that anybody that they choose to support are going against the core principles and beliefs of the Republican Party? How do we know that? Well, because for decades, they haven't really supported Republicans, meaning Republicans for decades didn't agree or align with them. So what does that say about the Republicans that this PAC, that the Teachers Union PAC out of Jefferson County is choosing to support? How conservative could they actually be? How grounded in conservative philosophy could they be? If literally a group that's never, ever looked at Republicans as at large and said, you know what, I like what I see there. I like the majority of Republicans. They've never said that. So that means they diametrically are opposed to core Republican beliefs. Because if they weren't, they would find more than just this is the first time they've really supported any en masse. And so I ask you this question. Can we honestly expect the 7 candidates that they're supporting to be shining examples of conservative thought? Can we expect that out of them at all? A bird birds of a feather flock together. And if they're flocking with these Republicans, and priorly they've only ever flocked with Democrats, they're probably not the most conservative Republicans. And the time for non-conservative Republicans is over. We have 80% in the House, 80% in the Senate. We're not worried about just holding on to seats for the sake of holding on to seats. We need conservatives in office, period. Let's continue in this article here. The two Republican candidates receiving the most financial support from Better Schools Kentucky include current state representative Killian Timney of Lexington, receiving $75,000, and former state rep Ed Massey of Northern Kentucky getting $90,000, both of whom strayed from the rest of their caucus in 2022 by voting against a bill to fund charter schools, and in 2021 by voting against a bill to create tax credits for private school tuition. Timney voted against House Bill 2, but 3 GOP members who voted for the bill are ones that are being targeted for defeat by Better Schools Kentucky, who is supporting their GOP challengers. These targets include incumbents Representative Steve Doan of Erlinger, Marion Proctor of Union, and Candy Massaroni of Bardstown. Now, let me just real quick go over why a lot of these races, in my opinion, are going to end up as a complete waste, specifically in Northern Kentucky. First, the 3 of these are incumbents now, but most importantly, how did they come into office? Well, two of them. Because Candy Massaroni is a current incumbent, but she was first running for an open seat. So she was running for an open seat, not as an incumbent. And then both Doan and Proctor were running against longtime, powerful incumbents. All 3 of them were up against well-funded opponents. They had huge financial backing. So 2 of these people take down incumbents. One of them take down an open seat against somebody who has huge financial backing. And that was before they were in office. And so now they are incumbents. And there is, a real benefit to being an incumbent in office. One, you get a whole lot of free press. You're mentioned in newspaper articles all the time. You can write op-eds. They'll publish them in the newspaper articles. You're asked to speak at events all the time. You're referenced. People call you. The local people, they've worked with you. And once they've gotten to know you and like you, in politics, a lot of times, unfortunately, it's not about principles. It's not about how you vote. It's about whether or not they like you. And a lot of these people, having worked with people in their area now, are liked when before it was the incumbent who was liked. So, they've taken down these incumbents. They're liked now. They're probably better funded now because when they currently have office, other people are more likely to give them money to hold on to office than it being a long shot, especially when you're trying to take down, an incumbent. And so they've already proven they can win races too when they are significantly financially down. Then for the open seat that they're getting involved in with Ed Massey. This is an important history here. Ed Massey lost to Steve Rawlings 2 years ago when Ed Massey was the incumbent. Steve Rawlings is now running for the Senate, and so now Ed Massey's running against TJ Roberts in an open seat primary. But Ed Massey lost badly even after Better Schools, this same PAC, and others dropped a lot of money into them as well. So as an incumbent, with pretty much the same amount of funding as it looks like he's going to have now, he got like 33% of the vote against Rawlings, who was not as well funded and was not the incumbent. So now you think as a non-incumbent, Ed Massey will somehow do better, even though he just lost 2 years ago? He's already proven that the district does not like him, even when they spend big money. I don't think so. I don't think that's going to work out for them well in the long run, because it doesn't make sense. I mean, like I said, there's a huge push to incumbency, but more importantly, it's hard to buy races. When you're talking about the state house, it's hard to buy a state house race because they're not very big races. They're not large. You're talking maybe 3,000 people or so come out to vote in them. And that brings in some interesting dynamics and some what I call diminishing rate of returns. And so we'll continue going over this article and kind of going over this thought process on primary politics. How's it work in this house? and why I think, a lot of the schools is wasting money here. But we'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Want to reach out to the show? Feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, we've been digging through this article from NPR, wrote by Joe Sonka, going over some races here in Kentucky. We so far have been talking about how the Jefferson County Teachers Union, the Louisville Teachers Union, is dumping $300,000 into 7 races, including some big money behind Killian Timoney and Ed Massey. For the first time in a while, showing significant financial contributions to Republicans, talking about what this means, the dynamic of those races. Continuing now in the article, Better Schools Kentucky has also spent $25,000 so far to support GOP Representative Michael Meredith of Oakland, who voted against House Bill 2 this year and private school tax credits in 2021, though he did vote for the charter school funding in 2022. Meredith voted for a resolution this year to create a task force to consider breaking up Jefferson County Public Schools, a measure opposed by Jefferson County Teachers Association, though Timoney was one of just 4 Republicans to vote against it. Whereas the candidates supported by the teachers union in this primary are generally regarded as mainstream Republicans, the candidates it opposes form what's known as the Liberty wing of the party, a faction that often challenges GOP leadership in the pursuit of less spending and smaller government. Now, it's funny that the way that Joe Sonka here is describing Timoney and Meredith, he's calling them mainstream. And then the other Republicans that are being challenged are somehow not. They're a part of this Republican far-right group. They're not a mainstream Republican, which I would argue the exact opposite. I would say that the people here, like Killian Timoney, like Ed Massey, like Michael Meredith, those people, I would suggest, are the ones who aren't the mainstream. You know how I know that? Because a PAC who doesn't really support Republicans and hasn't really supported them for decades because they disagree with Republicans is now supporting these Republicans. How could you call Republicans getting support from basically a Democrat PAC mainstream Republicans? I wouldn't call them that. They're literally the opposite of mainstream. They are not like the average Republicans. The average Republicans disagree with them because they're so different from all the other Republicans that the Democrat liberal teachers union is giving these people $300,000 total. I mean, you call them mainstream. And also, too, at this point, it's worth noting why the big money spent won't guarantee victories and how this works out. Because you certainly have a rate of diminishing returns here. Because one, you only have like 3,000 people voting. And so the ability to win an election is, can you get those like 3,000 people that vote in a House primary? And there might be a little bit more this time because of Donald Trump on the ballot, but there's not going to be massively more. Can you get those 3,000 people, can you get them at least a message or two that is hard-hitting, that is clear, concise, and convinces them to vote for you and not the other person? Can you get that to them? And the problem people like Ed Massey, who was in office, Killian Timoney, and Michael Meredith have, is they have absolutely trash voting records. Killian Timoney, for an example, he isn't just voted along the way that the teachers would want him to, every time the teachers unions would want him to, every time, against school choice, against charter school funding, against, tax incentives to help disadvantaged children, means-tested children go have educational opportunities. It's not just that he votes against that. He's voted against every single bill at all that's told these schools they can't push their liberal agenda on these kids. He's voted against every single one of those bills too. But also he's voted against every single social bill coming down. Voting against protecting, saying that men can't compete in women's sports. He voted against that. And so the problem when you have somebody like Timoney, yeah, he can spend all the money he wants to, but you can't run away from your voting record. And as long as his opponent, who in this case is Thomas Jefferson, has enough time and money to knock enough doors and get some mailers in people's mailboxes, run some well-targeted ads, maybe run a few TV ads, as long as he has enough money to do that and make sure your voting record's out there, it doesn't matter how much you spend. You can't run away from that. And so that's why, this big money spending, and then you go to Northern Kentucky, it's even harder for big money spending to win it because mailers are mailers, right? And how many mailers can you really send? I mean, the cost to send, a House district of mailer is 3,000 to 4,000-ish. How many of those can you send before people are like, I get it, you're running for office. So what else are you going to do? Run TV ads? Well, the problem with Northern Kentucky is that TV ad market deals out of Cincinnati. And so you're paying massive rates for advertising because you have to pay for the Cincinnati market. And it's incredibly expensive in Northern Kentucky. Continuing now in the article. In its February and March filings to the Kentucky Registry of Election Finance, reporting independent expenditures in GOP races, Better School Kentucky indicated the advertisements it funded would be done through two different federal super PACs, Common Sense Kentucky and the Commonwealth Conservative Coalition. Common Sense Kentucky was created during the 2022 primary season by Republican strategist Trey Watson, who said its goal was to support Main Street Republicans in favor of common sense and conservative solutions. That support consisted of 54,000 of ads to support Massey and Koenig against their Liberty Wing primary challengers, which to no avail, both of them lost. The PAC's largest funder was Better Schools Kentucky, who earmarked $40,000 to support Massey, its only involvement in the GOP primaries that year. When asked about Better Schools Kentucky's $100,000 contribution to Common Sense Conservatives this year, Watson said the PACs aren't working together to advance any specific issue or policy. Rather, it just so happens that some of the incumbents and some of the challengers that we like and dislike happen to align. Now, I want you to listen here to what examples Trey Watson gives, okay? Watson added, they are supporting Republicans who are willing to work well with others, citing Doan as an example of a Republican incumbent who does not. Listen to what he says here. He voted against the Republican budget. He voted against the Republican crime package. He's been out against rules being put forth by leadership. This is why people like Trey Watson, they make my skin crawl. They are exactly what's wrong with politics. I mean, if I could point to a perfect example, what is the mindset that is destroying politics? I would say Trey Watson. Trey Watson's mindset. That is what's destroying it. Because he doesn't care about the country's future at all. This has nothing to do with principles. It's all team red versus team blue. It's all listen to the coach. There's no doctrine or principle here. Listen, he said he voted against the Republican budget. In the first segment of the show, I talked about that Republican budget. What conservative Republican would vote for a budget that large? For the last several episodes, I've been going through all the pork in these. What conservative Republican would vote for that? Then goes, he voted against the Republican crime package. I've gone over the Republican crime package and the issues I've seen with it. Then what's he say? He says he's been out against rules being put forth by leadership. So going against leadership and voting against the Republican budget and the Republican crime package means he doesn't work well with others. He's not team Republican enough. He doesn't manage to talk about principles in there. He doesn't talk about what's the principle. If a Republican pushes it, you have to vote yes for it. That's how we've gotten to where we are, where we have Republicans spending 57% more than Democrats. Just because there's an R next to it doesn't mean it's good. But that's all it's about. It's not about accomplishing anything. It's Team R versus Team D, and that's it. That's it. They don't care about anything greater at all. And it's extremely frustrating to see these people. And that's why they bring in the money. Because they're like, hey, whatever we got to do to make sure Team R wins, to make sure my team wins, that's all I care about. It'd be very easy for Doan or Proctor or Massaroni to have voted yes on that budget. That was the politically easy thing to do, because it opens you up for all kinds of attacks for not doing so. But they said, no, I have a principle and I'm going to stand on it. And because they have a principle and they're standing on, that's exactly why people like Trey want to take them down. That's the evil in politics right now. It needs to be stamped out. We need to send a clear message by saying it doesn't matter how much money you spend, our souls are not for sale. Well, I said I'd talk about Southern Poverty Law Center getting involved in something, but I ran out of time, so we'll have to cover that next week. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. Have a good one. I hope you enjoy the Eclipse Monday too. We'll see you.